Okay, well, the conquest of Ai, which follows the conquest of Jericho in the book of Joshua, is difficult to read because it's particularly violent. But at least this time you don't have anybody hoarding any of the booty or the spoils of the conquest. They behave properly. And I want to try to help you understand why this isn't just a chronicle of militaristic slaughter. It is that to a certain extent. This is at the end of Joshua 8. Then this is after they've conquered Ai. Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There, in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on stones a copy of the law of Moses, which is the Ten Commandments plus all the other Mosaic laws, at least the Ten Commandments. All the Israelites with their elders, officials, and judges were standing on both sides of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priests who carried it. Both the foreigners living among them and the native-born were there. Half of the people stood in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had formerly commanded when he gave instructions to bless the people of Israel. Afterwards, Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived among them. This is a ritual to mark the establishment of the people of God as Israel in the promised land. This is really, I think, more important to the author of the book of Joshua than the details, the military details of the conquest, which sometimes are contradictory, because at one point earlier in Joshua 8, it is said that Joshua will have a force of 30,000. Later, I believe it's 3,000 or 6,000, something like that. A more reasonable number, probably. So it's not so much the military success. That's not the point of this, even though that shocks us. And I have to keep reminding you, God has a reason for this. It has to do with the slaughter of the innocents that the pagans are indulging in and all that. It's still shocking to read these stories. But I think the author is trying to communicate something beyond the militaristic events. The author is trying to say, this was the establishment of the people of God, or the re-establishment, that they once had Moses, their great prophet and leader, who gave them the law, God's law through the hand of Moses, delivered to the people with the Ten Commandments on stone, and then all the elaborate Levitical laws, laws we find in Leviticus and the other books, all the elaborate law of Moses that that were added to that. This is what Joshua goes over, as if to say, here we are, not only here we are, but this is who we are. Now, of course, thou shalt not murder. We talked about that in class. They would not consider warfare murder, although we understand it a little differently. And even today, we have medics who try to help people, even in war, who will try to keep the enemy alive and heal them. And as I've said before, if a police officer uses a gun and fells someone who's causing trouble, he will immediately call for medical aid, because we're not necessarily trying to kill, but we're trying to protect. Now, that's a little different from what the people of Israel are doing. They're trying to push away the evil. If you look at it at least symbolically, you can understand it rather than being shocked by the events. And that is, they're trying to purge the evil from among them. They're trying to purge, you might say, the bad leaven, the bad yeast, so that they will be an unleavened lump, as St. Paul talks about, so that they will be like their own Passover bread, their own hosts. so to speak. They're trying to purge the land and establish themselves as the people of God. And to do so, they have this very important ritual at the end of the conquest of Ai. Because the conquest is not important, it's the establishment of God's people that's important. That's at least what the author seems to be conveying, and that seems to be what's going on in the minds of Joshua and the Israelites. So keep that in mind. This is kind of a rebirth, a reestablishment. This is kind of, we are the people of God, and we are remembering Moses and the law. And if we forget it, woe to us. Though, of course, they do forget it, and they don't always heed it. Why? Because they're human, kind of like you and me. Or at least like me. I'm not sure you're all human. I think most of you are. At any rate, that seems to be what's going on in Joshua 8.